Welcome to the No More Perfect Marriages video series. And to start us off, we thought we'd let you in on a few things about ourselves.
I love coffee. The bolder, the better.
And I love tea. I've tried to love coffee, but I just can't make myself like it.
I love mornings.
And I am a night owl through and through.
I love anything spicy.
Mild for me only, please.
I am an extrovert. I love hanging out with people, and weekends mean party.
And I'm an introvert. I love people, but when I get to the weekend, honestly, I don't want to see anybody until I get to church on Sunday morning.
I love nuts in my brownies.
And my mantra is that hard things like nuts do not belong in soft things like brownies.
I am an external processor, which means I talk about it, and talk about it some more.
And I'm an internal processor, which means I think about it, I think about it, I think about it. And when I'm making a decision, I think about it some more. And then I tell him what we've decided.
That is so true. Oh my gosh. I am a feeler, which means I process the world around me emotionally.
And I'm a thinker, which means I process the world around me logically.
I am a glass is half empty kind of guy.
And I'm a glass is half full kind of girl.
We are so different.
Absolutely.
And welcome to our real marriage.
And welcome to our kitchen. We were actually renovating our kitchen at the same time when we were writing the book about renovating our marriage.
We are crazy, aren't we?
And so we decided it would just make sense to do the videos for the No More Perfect Marriages series in our kitchen. So we just want to welcome you here. We're so glad that you're joining us. One of the things that we have come to understand is that marriage is affected by what we call the perfection infection.
Yep.
And the perfection infection is when we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others, and when we unfairly compare ourselves and others to other people. What often happens when we have the perfection infection affecting our marriage is that we begin to compare the insides of our marriage to the outsides of other marriages. And what we do is we begin to become just a little bit disillusioned with our very real marriage, with our very real spouse, with our very real circumstances, because we think that, gosh, other people don't struggle with this. And so what begins to happen with that is, without realizing it, those begin to pull us apart. Those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions begin to pull us apart. And something that we call a fade begins to happen in our marriage.
Jill and I have learned, throughout our marriage, we had worked very hard on our marriage through counseling, through conferences, reading books, but still we began this concept of a slow fade. And when we were remodeling our kitchen, we actually found great examples of that slow fade.
We did. In fact, we wanted to share these with you because we uncovered 7 layers of wallpaper, okay? 7 layers. Our house is 104 years old. And so as we were renovating and we were pulling off these layers, we thought, wow, this is really a visual. And so we saved one of each layer to put it in here. It actually hangs in our kitchen as a visual of the many different families that lived in this house and the different seasons of life. But even more than that, it's a visual of what can happen to our marriage if we're not intentional about paying attention to the fades. Because some of these are very faded. They haven't been cared for. They haven't been taken care of. And so what we really want to remind ourselves and what we really want to encourage you is to pay attention to those places where we begin to separate our heart from our spouse's heart, 1 centimeter at a time. We don't even realize it when it's happening. But our hope is that as we take this journey together, you'll begin to recognize this concept of a fade. Now, I'll tell you something that is really important. You have to be willing to do the hard emotional work.
Growing your marriage is hard work. One of the lies that we can believe from culture is that this should be easy. In fact, I've struggled with believing that and saying that myself. But marriage is absolutely hard work. And in working hard, the place that you start is understanding the home that you grew up in and how that home environment helped shape you. And what Jill and I call that home environment is your home internship. For some of you, you grew up in one home and you were in that home your whole life until you were married. Some of you bounced around from one home to another because of your circumstances. All of those environments are your home internship. And in that home internship, that's where we learned about conversation, conflict, how to handle anger, where we learned about sex and finances. All of those things helped shape who we are today from that original home internship.
And without realizing it, I mean, sometimes there are things that we learn in our home internship and we really want to carry those into our adult years. And there are other times that there are things that we learn in that home internship and we're like, I am not going to raise my family that way. I'm not going to be that kind of a parent. I'm not going to treat my spouse that way. But the truth is, if we don't stop and evaluate it and we don't replace it with something else in its place, we actually will likely continue in the same way that we were raised. And so we begin by actually evaluating that blueprint, that home internship, to better understand what it is that we are carrying into our marriage. And it's not to blame, it's to understand. And then to know where we need to maybe untangle ourselves emotionally from how we grew up or even previous relationships. If you're in a second marriage, part of your internship has to do with previous relationships. And so we have life experiences, those contribute to our internship as well. So once we begin to evaluate that and understand that, it helps us to understand why we do what we do, why we respond the way that we respond to one another. And the more we do that, the healthier we get to be as an individual because we become more self-aware, we understand our responses, we understand the places where we maybe need to find some new ways to interact because the ways that we carried into our marriage weren't the healthiest. And the more we begin to dig into that, peel away those layers of wallpaper, deal with those fades, the healthier our marriage gets.
So Jill and I, we are super excited to walk with you through this study, No More Perfect Marriages. And in doing so, we want to come back to what's important, and that's Scripture. In Romans 12:2, it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by the testing you may discern what is the will of God, and what is good and acceptable and pleasing."
It's possible that you are watching these videos and reading the book with your spouse, sitting side by side and taking it all in. It's also possible that your spouse isn't interested in reading the book or watching the videos. It's also possible that you're doing this in some sort of a small group, a women's group, a men's group, and your spouse isn't getting the same information you are. No matter what your circumstances, I want to encourage you to do the hard work emotionally, even if it's on your own. Because when one person in a marriage changes, the dynamics of the relationship changes. There have been times in our relationship where I was more committed and more invested than Mark was. There have been times where he was more committed and more invested than I was. And so we kind of had to stand on our own 2 feet and be determined to be the right person in the midst of hard. I want to encourage you to resist the urge to point fingers and to look at the other spouse, hoping that they heard that or wishing they were sitting next to you, and just ask yourself, what's in that truth for me? And we want you to remember, more than anything else, a real marriage isn't perfect. A real marriage is 2 people being perfected.